Bell Holder, the host of UNCTAD Conversations. Today we're at Sweetfield Manor, one of Barbados' many picturesque hotel properties where locals and visitors alike can escape into a vacation paradise. You know, many hotels like Sweetfield Manor and many of the businesses in the hospitality and tourism sectors have been hit hard by the COVID pandemic. On UNCTAD Conversations, we'll hear directly from those charged with the responsibility of navigating the economic challenges. Today's guest is a gentleman of strong faith and family. Our UNCTAD conversation with the Minister of Labour, Social Partnership Relations and the Third Sector, the Honourable Colin Jordan, is straight ahead. Thank you so much for taking the opportunity to sit down with us for an UNCTAD conversation. It's interesting in looking at your career that you started out very much in one of these properties, a hotel property in the tourism industry.
I spent, before coming into government, about 25 years in the tourism industry. And tourism would include hotels and attractions, the entire tourism product. And yes, so this is feeling at home in one of the aspects of the industry that I would have been responsible for promoting in a previous life.
So how have you been able to parlay a lot of that knowledge and experience now into looking at labor?
I probably should begin by saying, before looking specifically at labor, which is part of my portfolio, what that experience has allowed for me, and it has allowed it for me because I became a leader in the industry. So I used to be the president of the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association. Because of that, I'd been involved in a lot of interactions with the public service, with the government, particularly the Ministry of Tourism, but also town planning. So that interaction, that involvement prepared me for the structure of government, the speed of government, the different ways, methods and processes. That prepared me in a very general kind of way. And I'm happy for that, because if I wasn't prepared, my response on assuming the portfolio might have been a bit different. So I did have that preparation. Now, what also prepared me was that in a lot of my tourism life, I was also responsible for people management. And so while I am essentially a finance person, and that is really what I did in hotels, because I started to like human resource management, I took that responsibility on when I changed jobs at some point in time in my career. And until the end of my tourism career, which was in 2018, I'd been responsible to some degree for human resources management. And because of that, I've been involved in conversations to do with Employment Rights Bill, for example, before it became law, sexual harassment before it became law, and the discussions around those pieces of legislation, so that on assuming the responsibility, I had some background information. I knew some of the discussion, some of the areas that people were concerned about, some of the things that I myself would have wanted explain, change in that previous life. So it was good preparation.
So COVID certainly has changed the labor market in Barbados. So how have you been navigating that? I mean, I think it's definitely brought up a challenge that none of us anticipated. Mm-hmm. And certainly at your level where you're shaping policy, mm-hmm. what it has, the challenges that it has presented.
One thing about the COVID environment and the COVID situation is that it is not specific to Barbados. What that means is that there are lessons to be learned from situations outside of Barbados that are kind of similar to what we are experiencing in the country.
Yeah.
COVID is a public health issue. And once it comes to health, people get uneasy, uncertain, panicky. Scared. Absolutely good word to use. And because of that, reactions are sometimes not always what reactions would be, were being scared not part of the equation, part of the situation. That has caused a lot of uncertainty in the labor market. So something that a person may have put up with before, they're not minded to do that anymore. The kind of conversations sometimes that employers would ordinarily have with workers didn't seem to happen or as much anymore. So there are a number of things.
What do you mean? Give us some examples.
Now, if you're going to make a major change, there are many companies. I mean, you always have rogue employers, but there are the majority of organizations that would engage their people. When the pandemic struck and the shutdown happened, it seemed to us that everybody headed for the hills, to use a kind of a colloquial term. So the kind of conversations that people would ordinarily have with their workers, employers and workers, managers and workers, didn't seem to happen. The tolerance sometimes that workers may have had in situations didn't seem to happen because everybody had gone into panic, it seemed, or quite a number of persons. And that made the environment very uncertain. It made it tense, and the responses, like I said, were not necessarily, or in all cases, the kind of responses that we were accustomed to. So it meant that the ministry, through its Labor Department, and myself as minister, had to get involved in a lot more issues than we would ordinarily get involved with. So there are more people coming to the Labor Department.
Right.
There are more complaints. My colleague, members of Parliament, are hearing more complaints. And that was part of the impact of the pandemic. And then along with that, on the other side, in terms of people seeking employment, many more queries about overseas employment opportunities, which my ministry is also responsible for. So there are people asking about the Canadian Agricultural Workers Program. We started a pilot in the United Kingdom, and persons asking about that. And then we were able to, we think, get our foot in the door in the United States, and there are people asking about that. So on one side, on the industrial relations side, it is tense, it is, I hesitate to use the word volatile,
Right.
but maybe whatever the term is that is just before volatile is where we have been. I think it is settled a bit. On the other side, persons looking for opportunities outside
Right.
of the country. As a matter of fact, when we started the pilot program to the United Kingdom, there were few, it was very small, but persons traveled in spite of the fact that COVID then in the United Kingdom was more rampant than it was in Barbados. And a similar thing happened in Canada, but people wanted to work, people need to
Right.
work. And so once the opportunities presented themselves, then Barbadians were ready to take advantage of the opportunities.
How often do you look at the unemployment numbers? How often do you look at those numbers and process what is happening?
I'm aware of the numbers, I would say maybe on a quarterly basis. But my focus is not really on the numbers. My focus is, we're responsible for the overseas employment program, not domestic employment necessarily, even though it is the responsibility of all of us as a government, as a cabinet, to want to generate as many job opportunities as possible. But my specific concern is the overseas program. And so what we've been working to do is to maximize opportunities. So we haven't been looking to say, well, the numbers move from 17% to 15%. We are just looking for as many opportunities as possible. If the number came down to 5% or 6%, we are still looking for opportunities because it means that there are still Barbadians who are looking for work and who want those opportunities. So I've been focusing more on generating those opportunities, and that is the reason why we went after the opportunity that we saw in the United Kingdom, and we've been pretty aggressive, I think, going after opportunities in the United States. Those are not as easy to access, but we are seeing some green shoots, and we're
Right.
definitely going after those.
And I asked about the numbers because numbers are never just numbers.
Yeah.
Numbers are mothers and fathers
Absolutely.
and children and families and households.
Yes.
So numbers are never just numbers.
Yeah.
So when people are faced with the stresses of how do I keep my household together, how do I put food on the table, those are really how you have to look at what is happening.
Yes, and that's the reason why we look for opportunities. We are not, and that's the reason why we refer to not checking to see whether it's 17, 15, or 5. Once there are people without work, It means that there are persons who are not able to support themselves or their dependents. But what I know of work, being a worker myself and being in charge of human resource management, is that work is what gives many, many people that sense of worth, that sense of value. So when a person is without work, there is a psychological impact. And COVID, we talk about COVID being an excuse, but COVID has exacerbated everything. So that the ordinary psychological impact, which is negative, so it has to be satisfied, the person needs to get an opportunity to work, but COVID makes that 10 times worse. And so it becomes even more important to focus on generating or seeking out, unearthing those opportunities that would provide work, jobs, meaningful work for people.
All right, so we're going to continue our UNCTAD conversation, and we're going to look at the theme for 2021, from inequality and vulnerability to prosperity for all. Today's UNCTAD conversation is with Minister Colin Jordan, and it's interesting that you touched on exactly a note that I have written here, that how we equate work, our jobs, our careers to a big part of our pride and our self-worth. And you were saying that's something you witnessed firsthand.
Yes, I saw it as a member of parliament, and just before I became a member of parliament, interacting particularly with men who did not have jobs and listening to them pour out of their heart what was going on with them. And I was saying, in spite of sometimes the gender stereotyping that we may do or not do, what is very clear to me as a member of parliament is that men want to be able to provide. And a man without a job, it is not really about putting gas in the car. It is really about not being able to provide for either his partner or his children. And I've seen the impact that that has on men when people can't provide. And that is why provision of job opportunities is so critical.
Yeah.
Really, really critical.
Many people will tell you that single women felt the most impact from the loss of jobs. Is there any special focus around that?
We've not specifically identified women versus men in terms of the approach to generating new jobs. What we have done, though, is when we explore the opportunities within the United States, a lot of those opportunities are in tourism and service-related areas. And those are some of the ones we are going after because the tradition, not because women are made for any particular job, traditionally, women have been involved in many service sectors. As a matter of fact, that was one of the reasons why they've been impacted so significantly in the pandemic, because a lot of these service sectors, including hospitality, were really hit very hard. And we are exploring hospitality options, but we've seen women coming forward for agricultural roles. I mean, they have been involved all along, but not in the same numbers as men. But we are seeing women who are interested in those agricultural workers program. What we've done, though, and we continue to push on you didn't ask this, but on the youth side, because there are issues with men, issues with women, young people were also significantly impacted. And ministry has a first jobs program. We've titled it Job Start Plus. And in that, we've been working to have young people get 12 months experience. And we did this from before COVID, but we've been trying to push during the COVID period. It is difficult because the model originally has been set up with a sharing of the stipend between government and the organization. The advent of COVID has meant that many of those organizations don't have the wherewithal to participate. So we are now in the process of rethinking the structure and seeing how we could reach out more to put businesses in a position where they can employ and give young people a leg up, so to speak.
So the theme for UNCTAD 15 is from inequality and vulnerability to prosperity for all. As Labor Minister, what does that mean for you?
That means a lot of things. I'm not sure if anybody gonna feel that we mentioning the word COVID too much. But like I said, COVID has exacerbated everything. The matter of inequality. Inequality we've had between adults and young people in terms of access to the job market. So Job Start Plus was done because young people keep saying to us, everybody's asking for 12 months experience, a year's experience. No, nobody gives us any start. So when are we going to get this experience? That issue has to be resolved to create some equality, to allow young people
Access.
to access a fair shot at employment. So there's inequality there. In Barbados, as it relates to gender, in the workplace, there's been a study, I don't remember how long ago it was, but a study showed that in terms of pay, we don't have the pay differential, let's use a legal term, prima facie, on the face of it, that some other countries have. But what the research is showing is that women are often more qualified than men, but they work for the same, what economists will call the nominal dollar. So there's an opportunity. You have a master's, I have CAPE, and we both work well. I get $1,000 for the job. You're doing the same job title, you get $1,000. So there's a bit of inequality in terms of the reward for the additional qualifications. Right. Those are matters that are on the radar, but we've not been able to address them in the way that we would want to, because we've been focused on a number of other things. But that is one of the things that comes to mind when we talk about inequality. Vulnerability, women who have households to manage and who then are not as able to participate in the workforce as much as others, that makes them vulnerable. And we've seen in terms of then in the area of domestic violence, the reliance on others. So there's that domestic vulnerability which relates to the workplace, and there's also vulnerability in the area of climate. Storms, hurricanes, floods have the potential to really do a lot of damage in terms of work and workplace. We had freak storm.
Right.
We had
volcano ash.
We had Hurricane Elsa. So
COVID.
We see the labor market disturbed because at some points in time, businesses can't open, and that's on top of COVID. So businesses not open, or traffic to the businesses reduce, turnover reduce, that impacts employment. And so vulnerability, either from individual vulnerability or vulnerability nationally as a result of climate, those are all issues that impact workers. And like you were intimating earlier, these workers are human beings. They're people who have to live, who have to feel good about themselves, who have to support themselves and others. And so the theme makes a lot of sense for us because we have to move from that place, the inequality, the vulnerability, and the prosperity that we're looking for is a holistic prosperity. So prosperity where people can feel satisfied, fulfilled, where they are able to improve their standard of living. And we, by introducing the national minimum wage, that was one of the things that we did to move people along. That is not the end point, but we realize that to move from inequality and vulnerability to prosperity for all is not a snap of the finger, it is a process. And there are going to be a number of steps in the process. So the national minimum wage is one, getting industries back up and running is another, overseas employment opportunities is another, making sure that the laws that we have are adhered to, so that helps with reducing inequalities and vulnerabilities. So making sure that all those things happen are part of the process of moving toward prosperity for all. And from a labor perspective, the ILO is very clear. We talk a lot about decent work. And an international term now, but I always use the Bayesian understanding of decent. Decent means acceptable, nice, that kind of thing. And the prosperity for all will mean that everybody has a decent shot at improvement, but also the work itself can be considered decent work.
Yes, and filled you with a sense of pride.
Pride and fulfillment.
Right. Okay, so when we come back, we're going to talk more about the third sector. Certainly, we need to address that. And we also need to talk about the social partnership. We'll be right back. So one of the things that you've been quoted as saying is that we need to share the burden between employers and employees in terms of fighting our way back and improving the economy. I know that there are many employees who often feel disadvantaged by their employers. And I know that there are many employers who felt, even you mentioned the increase in the minimum wage, who also felt that that would be a burden in terms of keeping their businesses open. What have you done in terms of looking at that and people's responses?
I want to speak initially to the issue of the national minimum wage. And I have the fortune of having studied a bit of economics while I was at university. And I've said to employers, particularly employers in business, in commercial activity, when a person has more to spend, persons who we consider to be people use the term working class, persons who are earning minimum wage have what is referred to as a very high propensity to consume and to spend. Those persons are not persons who can save 10% of their pay or 25% of their pay. Their wages go directly into purchasing food and essentials to keep, as we would say, body and soul together. If a person in that category is given an additional, earns an additional $10, almost all of that is going to go directly back into the economy. So more bread will be sold, more biscuits will be sold, more food will be sold, maybe furnishings as well, house repairs done. The economy overall, I'm not speaking to specific companies, but the economy overall is going to be the beneficiary of an action like that to increase the ability of people to earn and to keep themselves at a decent level in terms of their standard of living. The matter of burden sharing cannot be equal. There has to be equity. So the burden has to be proportionate to the ability to bear burden. And we've done a number of things, the increase in minimum wage, but then we have to look at the worker. Over the last 3 years, transportation costs in terms of bus fares, in terms of petrol, we've had the sewerage levy, and the garbage levy. Those have impacted ordinary people. Ordinary people have been impacted. So it is not a matter of businesses only bearing the burden. Workers have also had to bear the burden. What we did before COVID struck was to increase the departure tax as well. And that would have impacted visitors.
One of the programs under your ministry was the Barbados Employability Project. Funny enough, you came in wearing a face mask that said the ILO on it, the International Labour Organization, which was very significant in terms of the Barbados Employability Project. There were free courses offered for social skills and occupational safety and health. What kind of response and results? Have those results been measured as yet?
I can't say they've been measured.
Right.
But the response has been overwhelming. Coming out of that, because like you indicated, that was specific to those 3 courses, which we consider core: occupational safety and health, we're in the middle of a pandemic, core skills, and entrepreneurship, because in these kinds of situations, pandemic, any kind of depressed situation, people turn to entrepreneurship, start their own businesses. Coming out of that, we were able then to forge a link with Coursera, which is maybe one of the world's largest online platforms for training, through the Commonwealth of Learning. And that Coursera partnership saw many thousands of Barbadians taking up the opportunity to have those free courses, to the extent now that we've formalized the relationship, and the National Transformation Initiative has an agreement, a licensed agreement with Coursera, and are offering some of those courses to Barbadians. We said from early in the pandemic that our intention was that whenever we get out of this situation, Barbados and Barbadians should be better positioned than when we went into the pandemic. Now, I indicated that we've not been able to measure the results, but I'm pretty sure in my mind that many of our people are better positioned because they have gone through lots of training. Some people have done 6 and 7 of the Coursera courses and have passed, have received the certification, which means that they are better positioned than before the courses began. So I'm pretty sure about that, even though I don't have empirical data that I can speak to in terms of what we have achieved.
In the 1 minute that we have left, what do you want to make sure, out of this entire conversation, one of the things that you want to leave with Barbadians?
I want to reinforce that the third sector, we didn't have a chance to speak to the third sector much. The third sector is critical. We spoke about businesses, we spoke about individuals. This was a matter of social safety nets and addressing vulnerabilities. A lot of that is done by third sector organizations, also known as civil society organizations, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and sometimes community-based organizations,
social
CBOs,
enterprises.
Social enterprises. And social enterprises is really what brings third sector into economic activity. And what we've been doing, let's segue in a little bit, we've been inviting a few of the third sector leaders to social partnership meetings. And that is because we recognize that they're not only in the social arena, but in social enterprise. But what I want to say to Barbadians and to everyone who will hear or see this conversation, civil society must be acknowledged. Its important role must be recognized. It must be supported. And that's one of the reasons why this government, at the beginning of its tenure, had a specific focus, and it lies to my ministry, on the third sector, because we recognize that there's no government that can do it alone. The private sector doesn't have that focus, even though they have some corporate social responsibility efforts. The passion to address social issues in a lot of cases lies with the third sector. I've often said, you can't pay a person enough to replicate the passion you see in the third sector. And so I would want to say to all of us, recognize the third sector, support the third sector, and one of the ways that we can have the third sector buoyant is if the overall economy is buoyant and those who donate and contribute can resume doing that in at the pace and with the volume of funding that would have happened before the pandemic struck.
All right, Minister Jordan, thank you so much for taking the opportunity to sit down with us for this UNCTAD conversation.
Thank you very, very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.